Buena. So
There you
that was that. So I don't even know if he's still alive. I got to check that out. So
go.
we'll see. But what time? We must be coming up on showtime here.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much. I'll see. I'll give it one more minute just to let a few more people trickle in.
Okay.
And,
And like I said, a lot of this I'm going to talk about was unavailable in South Dakota.
right. That's okay.
Well, that's fine because unless you're 80 years old, you don't remember. Although you might have some people in there who could tell me about their first experience TV in South Dakota because I've heard a lot about it back here in the East. You know, I got my first TV when in 1948. I was living in the tenement in the Bronx. I had a couple of kids. I couldn't get babysitters, and then I got the TV because my kids were brats. I got the TV, and everybody wanted to babysit, and they didn't want to be paid for it because they wanted to watch TV. I've edited those stories out because if I told all of those stories I've heard here, I'd be spending more time telling those stories than the stories. Uh, some of the stories are. Once before I go, one story. This woman, her family lived in the Bronx, and her father wanted TV desperately, and her mother didn't want it.
Mm.
And he's determined to get a TV. And he gets one off a truck. It's a hot TV. He gets one off a truck, and the cops are watching this going on. And he's living in a 6-story walk-up, and he's carrying this big TV and brings it up the stoop inside. Finally gets to the apartment. He knocks on the door. The wife opens. What's that? He brings it in. 5 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. 2 cops. You're under arrest. But they wanted him to rat out those people. And she said her parents were always fighting over the TV. I said, so what happened to your parents? She said, they got divorced.
Oh.
Why? Because of the TV.
Okay, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Everybody, hi, my name is Rochelle, and I work here at the Vermillion Public Library. And today we have Evan Weiner, who's going to talk about the early days of television. I guess I'll just go ahead and hand it over to you, Evan.
Okay, thank you, Rochelle, and thank you. And I hope everybody is having a nice day this Friday and have a nice holiday weekend, and you're staying safe, and you'll be healthy for the summer. My name is Evan Weiner. I've been involved in radio and TV since 1971, along with writing for newspapers, both as a reporter and an op-ed columnist. And today is my 65th birthday, so I am officially on Medicare. And I'm waiting for Joe Namath to come to my door and knock on the door and say, how about a Medicare supplement? That'll make it official. But anyway, television, the early days of TV, and unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I'm not sure, depending on your viewpoint, you didn't really get television until the mid-1950s in South Dakota. So you missed out on some of the things that went on, but I'm sure that you caught up over the years. This was the Indian head test pattern. And this was a cool thing when I was a kid. Well, first of all, before I talk about the Indian head test pattern, I got to talk about how difficult it was. And some of you might remember this. Some of you might remember this. How difficult it was to watch TV in the late 1950s and early 1960s, because it took some effort. It really did take some effort. You had to get up. You had to put on you flip the knob, the on and off switch. And then you had to sit down and wait until the TV picture tube warmed up. And it warmed up, you finally got a picture like that, except there was a problem with that. You might have some snow, or the lines may be rolling, and you have to adjust the horizontal or vertical hold. And then you had to get the rabbit ears in the right place so you could see a good TV picture. And then you sat down and you look what was on TV. Oh, I don't want to watch that. You had to get back up. You had to change the channel. And you looked again. Oh, okay, this is okay. And then 5 minutes later, you have to get up. And then the TV so the snow comes back. And you had to do that, or rolling. We had so many problems watching it. We had to work to watch TV. Today, you just go like that, point something, and it's there on a flat screen. But anyway, Indian head test pattern. That was cool. When I was 4 years old, 5 years old. If my parents, if I'm watching that and it's 11:30, 12 o'clock at night, my parents are asleep, I consider that a victory. I was up and they weren't up. TV was kind of funny back in those days because TV, there'd be snow, then you'd have the test pattern, and then you'd have the national anthem, maybe a sermon, and then you went into the programming. And the way it ended was similar. You'd have a sermon, and then you'd have the national anthem, and then that would be on, and then it would fade to snow. By the way, in Canada, the Indian head was a beaver. In Europe, the Indian head test pattern, the Indian head was a Viking, complete with horns. That was the test pattern. I have no idea what any of those numbers mean. They've been explained to me. It doesn't really matter to me. But you don't see this anymore, the test pattern. TV is commercial TV, at least in the United States, is 93 years old. 1928 WRGB, then W2XB started as the world's first television station in Schenectady, New York. Why Schenectady, New York? That's where the General Electric facilities were, and they were working on TV. Today, WRGB is known as WGY-TV up in Schenectady. In the 1980s, I was a reporter. I covered sports, and I would often go to news conferences in Manhattan. And one of the places I used to go to is a place called Gallagher's on 8th Avenue and 52nd Street, west side of Manhattan. And I knew Howard Cosell. In fact, Howard's grandchildren, I know, friendly with them. Colin, who is the PA announcer for the New York Mets, Justin, who's in Connecticut, who's a principal at a charter school, Jared Kahana, who is a lawyer with ESPN in Connecticut. So I know the Cosell kids. I knew, or his grandkids. I knew his daughter Hillary, and I certainly knew him. I saw him at a lot of functions, and for some reason, I was 27 years old, and he liked me. He used to talk to me. What the hell is a smart kid like you doing in a cockamamie business like this? Anyway, so we're at Gallagher's one day, and we're supposed to be going to a function, a boxing function, at about 12:15. And I get there around 5 to 12, and so does Howard. And when you were at Gallagher's, they didn't open up. They put you in this little enclave, and then you got to the floor to eat. And Howard is talking to me, and he's starting to talk about television. And this is probably where the idea in my head came for talking about the early days of TV. And he says, and he's in a slow voice because only about low voice because only about 2 or 3 people there at the time. And then more people walk in, and he starts, when they write the history of TV, they're going to write about the 3 C's: Cronkite, Cosell, Carson. Not necessarily in that order. Well, he made that point to everybody who gathered around to see Howard, and then we went upstairs. And I thought about this for quite a while. What did Howard mean? Because I used to sit there and try to translate what Howard said into my head. And this is what I came up with. Walter Cronkite, he became the most trusted man on television, maybe in the United States, on November 22nd, 1963. He announces that John Kennedy has been assassinated. The president is dead. When he makes the president is dead statement, Old Iron Pants, that was his nickname, dealt with him twice. Old Iron Pants, glasses come down, a tear is shed, he composes himself, the glasses are back up, and Old Iron Pants is back in the saddle. Cronkite at that point is only about 47 years old. That's about all he is at that point. But he becomes the most trusted man in America because of the glasses. And there's Howard Cosell. Howard was both the most popular and least popular man on TV at the same time. Usually he's the most popular, she's the most popular, she's the least popular, he's the least popular. And he made it on both accounts in 1974. He, of course, was one of the reasons that people tuned into Monday Night Football because it was entertainment. It just wasn't a game, as he had his foil. That Dan DeRoot, Don Meredith, the former quarterback with the Dallas Cowboys, in the booth on Monday Night Football starting in 1970. And here's Johnny. Johnny Carson started, well, when I'm live, I usually do this joke because I could see the reaction. When I ask, how many of you went to bed with Johnny Carson and was he any good? And you always get that. I won. And one woman said to me once, I watched him, but I wasn't in bed. I was ironing clothes. It was a great show to iron clothes by. Anyway, Johnny starts on October 1st, 1962. Groucho Marx is the first guest. And he's gone in 1992. Bette Midler, the last guest on his show. And Johnny, 30 years on TV. That's like 19 different TV lifetimes over the 30 years. Television really does start in Pittsburgh at the Westinghouse Laboratories, where Vladimir Kosmos-Dworkin invents the iconoscope in 1923. And with that, you could theoretically get a picture through the iconoscope. In the 1920s, by 1927, Philo Farnsworth. And for all of those who hated watching TV, you had to get up and adjust the dial and all that because it was rolling, as they called it back in the day. You got him to blame because he does get a television picture transmission. And he does that with an image composed of 60 horizontal lines, 60 lines, and they all rolled all the time. So you never really could watch a good television program through because you always had to fix the horizontal hold, H-O-L-D, hold, horizontal hold. One of the first TV shows ever is in Chicago on W9XAO and W9XAP. The production was made specially for television. It was called Their Television Honeymoon, and that was in 1931. The first regular electronic service of television was in Germany, in Berlin, March 22nd, 1935, and it was not used for entertainment. It was used by the Nazis for propaganda purposes. It used a 180-line screen, 180 lines making the picture. And it was on the air for 90 minutes, 3 times a week. And the Nazis wanted it to show this off, the 1936 Olympics, where the Aryan Society, in their minds, would show that they were racially superior, except when it came to Jesse Owens, who stole the show by winning 4 gold medals during the 1936 Olympics, and Hitler turning his back on Jesse Owens in disgust when he wins all those gold medals. During that summer of 1936, there were broadcasts up to 8 hours a day, and the broadcast took place in Berlin and in Hamburg, but television would be a flop in Germany. It was too expensive, not too many people bought it, and the Nazis decided to close it down because it wasn't doing the job that they had hoped propaganda-wise, and very few people were interested in television. 1939, television comes to the United States in form of commercial TV. And about 18 months ago, it was November of 2019, I'm out on Long Island. I'm at a senior's residence. And I'm doing this talk, and I put this picture up, and there was a guy who was about 92 years old at the time. And he says, oh, can I say something? And I said, yeah, because I give talks. I don't give lectures. You know, I'm not, it's talks, it's conversation. I said, sure, go ahead. He said, well, I was there in 1939. I said, well, how'd you like it? He said, I loved it. I loved the World's Fair. But he said, I was in that pavilion of the future. And the guy really was sharp mentally, very sharp mentally for 92. And he said, I walked in there and I'm looking at this, and there's this one-eyed cyclops, and I'm looking and I'm amazed by it. And somebody comes up to my parents and they said, somebody working in the pavilion, he says, can I borrow your son for a minute? About 12. And he says, I want to put him on TV, and you could stand right there and watch it. And they take him back into the back room, and he's on TV, and he says, hi, Mom and Dad. And he waves to them. And that was the highlight of his youth, being on TV in Flushing Meadow, New York, with his parents seeing him at the 1939 World's Fair. And if you went to the 1939 World's Fair, the Radio Corporation of America handed out this leaflet to you. And it was basically what television will mean to you. And you could watch an opera, you could watch a boxing match, you could watch an award show. You could watch a politician giving a speech. Well, I don't know if you want to watch a politician giving a speech, but you could. Or you could watch baseball at that time. Baseball, boxing, horse racing, the big sports at that time. And if you were in the New York City area when this thing was launched on April 30th, 1939, on top of the Empire State Building, there was an antenna and the signal went north, went east, went west, and went south for 50 miles, all within 200 miles of New York City Empire State Building over on 34th Street and 5th Avenue. And you wouldn't have to leave your home. You could see everything, be totally entertained by your little TV. I went up to Hyde Park a couple of years ago, the Presidential Library, Franklin Roosevelt, because I had to ask Roosevelt a few questions because I do other talks. One, why did you send the American team to Berlin for the 1936 Berlin Summer Olympics? How was it when you gave the first speech on television on April 30th, 1939 at the World's Fair? And the other is, why'd you allow baseball to continue after Pearl Harbor and send the green light letter? I got answers to all three. Roosevelt felt that it was good for the Americans to compete in the Olympics, even though it did legitimize the Hitler regime. He did the fireside talks on radio. He was used to talking to crowds. He was a masterful speaker. Television, no big deal. And he thought America needed recreation after Pearl Harbor was bombed, and he felt that baseball would provide that recreation. So I got my three answers there. On April 30th, Roosevelt appears at the opening ceremony of the 1939 World's Fair. He becomes the first president of the United States to give a speech that is broadcast on television. That's Walt Disney. It's a young Walt Disney. And Walt Disney was in on the ground floor of television, not only in the United States, but also in England. And Disney offers some cartoons to WNBT, Channel 1 in New York, W2XBS at the time. And oh, hey, if you're one of the 400 people or 400 families or individuals that own TV in the New York area in May of 1939, you're getting a cartoon. Hey, it's cool. You know, maybe you'll get Mickey, or maybe you get Donald, or Donald and Daisy, or Mickey and Minnie, or maybe you get Goofy, or maybe you get Pluto. Yeah, hey, it's great. I'm going to see a cartoon. I don't have to go to the movie theater. I can see it in my house, except you got Gus Goose. Gus Goose is a slob. It's just absolute slob. His food's all over the place. He's always dirty and all this other stuff. But you get Gus Goose. That's who you get. It's May 19th, 1939, and Walt Disney cartoon comes on. It's Donald's cousin Gus, who didn't make too many appearances after this. Gus did come back in the Who Framed Roger Rabbit movie. He was a slob, and I don't know, he was Donald's cousin. Donald's a duck, Gus is a goose. How could they be cousins? That doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, that cartoon is on W2XBS, later WNBC Channel 4 in New York, although it's on Channel 1 at this showing. And that's the first time a movie cartoon is televised in the United States. The first Major League Baseball game takes place, doubleheader between the Cincinnati Reds and the Brooklyn Dodgers at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn. The first Major League 2 games, doubleheader, telecast on W2XBS. That's my football book. You can only get it by as an ebook now. And there's a reason I have it on here, because that's Benny Feathers, who was a running back with the National Football League's Brooklyn Dodgers. And look at the referee. Looks like he's about ready to go out golfing. And poor Feathers, the running back for Brooklyn. The Pittsburgh defender, kind of a little unnecessary roughness, I think, as he brings him down, although the referee doesn't necessarily see it, so he may not be flagged down. But hopefully Benny had protection on as he carries the ball. This is a game against Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh in about 1938-39. The NFL's first television exposure would come when NBC broadcasts the Brooklyn Dodgers Philadelphia Eagles game from Ebbets Field in Brooklyn. The game was available to about 1,000 TV sets in the New York City area. If you were an opera buff, you were in the New York area, you could watch the Metropolitan Opera's first performance on TV, March 10th, 1940, and the Metropolitan Opera is still on TV 81 years later on PBS. Peter Carl Goldmark invents color TV, the CBS system of color TV. That is on August 29th. Oddly enough, NBC would beat CBS to the punch getting color TVs on. Color TV doesn't really come to CBS until around 1964, 1965. And Lucille Ball is one of the Here's Lucy shows, one of the first shows on TV on CBS that was in color, but color came about a decade earlier to the NBC stations. Commercials. I don't know how many of you are fans of commercials. I still watch on YouTube old commercials from the early days of TV in the early 1950s because they were cartoons, they were this, they were that, and they had stories behind them, real stories behind them. But anyway, this is the layout for the first commercial. You might remember the Indian head test pattern. Well, the Indian head test pattern was taken by NBC and made a Boulevard watch commercial. And basically what they did was they replicated the test pattern, took out the Indian head, which was in the middle of the test pattern, put in NBC, put in RCA, put in second hand, minute hand, and also an hour hand. And made believe it was kind of a clock, or did build a clock actually, and the numbers 12 through 11 on the clock, and then on the bottom there it says Boulevard Watchers. And the first TV commercial before Brooklyn Dodgers Philadelphia Phillies game on WNBT, which is what it was called at this point, National Broadcast TV, July 1st of 1940. Channel 1. It was at 2:29 in the afternoon that this momentous occasion occurred in television history, the first commercial, and it was for Boulevard watches. About $14 Boulevard paid for the exposure. So it's just a modified test pattern and shows hands. It was that simple, and they had a camera looking into it, and that's the first commercial. Later on, there would be animation, and you would have Boulevard watch time with the animation in the 1950s. Pearl Harbor comes, December 7th, 1941, and a New York Rangers hockey game is supposed to be on Channel 1 that afternoon, but it was preempted because of Pearl Harbor. That came down about 1:05 New York time, 7:05 out in Honolulu. Ray Forrest of WNBT broadcasts a special news report about the Pearl Harbor attack. That night, there's a second station that's on in New York, WCBW Channel 2, and that's a CBS station. CBS started in Philadelphia in 1927. WCAU radio in Philadelphia was the first station they had. And WCBW broadcasts a Pearl Harbor special from their Grand Central Terminal studios, which still kind of exist in Grand Central Terminal to this day. And away we go. Now, if you were in South Dakota when Jackie Gleason was first on the Dumont network back in 1951, you would not have been able to see it. There were no TVs in South Dakota at that time. Well, there might have been TVs. Somebody might have bought it. I should take that back. Somebody might have bought it, stored it, but there were no working television stations in South Dakota when the Jackie Gleason show debuted on the Dumont network. Now, this is a trade ad for CBS for his Saturday night shows with Joe the Bartender and With the Poor Soul and Ralph Cramden and Reginald Van Gleason and Fenwick Babbitt and the Loudmouth, all characters he developed on Dumont. Dumont is an interesting footnote now in the history of television. It shouldn't be, but it is. It lasted from 1946 to 1955. But in many ways, it was the cutting edge of television. And in South Dakota, you got the very, very tail end of the Dumont network in 1955. Dumont was one of the world's first commercial TV networks. They beat out NBC, they beat out CBS, even though NBC and CBS started before them. but it was local, very local, whether it was in Chicago or in New York. So they were the first, and they had affiliates, and they began operation in September 15th, 1946. And they offer the first television network soap opera, Faraway Hill, on October the 2nd. Some of the shows that were on that went to other networks eventually: Ted Mack's Original Amateur Hour, that began on radio as the Major Beau's Amateur Hour, and Frank Sinatra and the Hoboken Four were on Major Beau's Amateur Hour, and they lost. Maury Amsterdam, the Maury Amsterdam Show. Maury Amsterdam ended up on the Dick Van Dyke Show when it started in 1960, and his character, Buddy Sorrell, Carl Reiner, who wrote the Dick Van Dyke Show and created it, based the Maury Amsterdam character, Maury Sorrell, after some obscure writer I never heard of again, who worked on the show or shows. Somebody named Mel Brooks. I don't know if did you ever hear of Mel Brooks? I mean, this is the guy that Maury Amsterdam was patterned after. I don't know whatever happened to Mel Brooks. Captain Video and his Video Rangers. I was in Stamford, Connecticut about 4 or 5 years ago at a senior residence doing this talk, and I had this woman go, I said, that was car 54. Where are you? We're not talking about. She said, no. My father bought me the helmet, and I sat and watched Captain Video with the helmet on. It was great. And I did this talk in New Jersey also a couple of years ago, and this woman and this man obviously didn't know each other. And he said, I used to watch Captain Video with the helmet on. I said, do you know this woman in Stamford? Because she did too, and her father gave her the helmet. He said, I don't know anybody from Connecticut, but somebody gave me the helmet. I guess we have something in common. I watched Captain Video with the helmet on. And it was there are some Captain Video videos up on YouTube, and it was just such a cheesy set. It looked like you could just go like that and knock it all over. And Arthur Murray Dance Party, which was a big show. There's an Arthur Murray that was supposed to open before COVID about 4 miles up the road on Route 22 here near Eastchester, Scarsdale, Tuckahoe. They still claim they're coming soon. I speak on cruise ships. And when there's no COVID, and you could always tell Arthur Murray dancers when they get to the floor, because they come out, they bow to each other, and then they get in their whole thing, and you could always tell who went to Arthur Murray. Ernie Kovacs may have invented blackout comedy on television. He was a guy who was floating around South Jersey. He somehow got on TV in Philadelphia in 1949. And if you remember Rowan and Martin's Laughing, or even Saturday Night Live, you saw the old Ernie Kovacs show. He would do these quick blackout skits because he would sit there and edit with a scissor and a piece of tape, Scotch tape, and slice this stuff all together. And you would see Ernie go into the bathtub, and there would be, he'd come out, and there'd be 9 people coming out. He used to do that. Rowan and Martin's Laughing did that as well. Ernie Kovacs, the only reason that tapes exist of him today, of his show, is his widow, Edie Adams, wanted to get some of the tapes from ABC in the early 60s, and they said they erased most of them. There's still some around. She bought them, saved them. Most of the stuff from early days of TV is lost forever because A, it was live and there was no videotape, or B, a lawyer decided to get rid of a lot of kinescopes. I'll talk about that in a minute. But he invented a lot of the early stuff on TV, and some of the stuff 72 years later you could see in some shows still today. Why did Dumont fail? Well, Dumont didn't have a radio network. CBS and NBC had radio networks, and CBS can move somebody like Lucille Ball off of My Favorite Husband and create the I Love Lucy show, or CBS, which had Jack Benny, even though Jack Benny started on NBC radio, CBS could lift him onto TV. Or Ed Sullivan was pretty well known as a gossip columnist, and He hosted Toast of the Town, a variety show. So he was cool. NBC could have Milton Berle on or Sid Caesar, known quantities. Whereas the early and TV stations weren't affiliated with networks. They would cherry pick. I want this show, that show, that show, that show in those days. That's what happened in the early days of TV in South Dakota. Dumont didn't have too much to offer because they didn't have that reservoir of talent in radio. They could offer a pretty much unknown guy by the name of Jackie Gleason. They could offer somebody named Bishop Fulton J. Sheehan. They could offer Ernie Kovacs, but they were unknowns. But they had some other programming too, Dumont, that some stations took. The first network newscast out of Washington, D.C. Dumont Television Network, the nation's window on the world. They also had the first regularly scheduled children's show before Buffalo Bob Smith and Howdy Doody. It was called the Small Fry Club with Big Brother Bob Emery. And that got introduced into the daytime part of the schedule around 1946. And there he is, there's Ralph Cramden. And it was on the Cavalcade of Stars that this skit called The Honeymooners was on. By the way, that is Audrey Meadows, who is the second Alice Cramden. The first Alice Cramden was somebody by the name of Pearl Kelton. And she was outed as a communist. And the networks, it was CBS by this point where it was on, kicked her off because she was a communist during the Red Scare. And that was a big part of the early days of TV, the Red Scare. So he had to find another actress. He found Alice. And he's going in, he's mad, and he's going into one of these days, Alice, one of these days, bang, zoom, to the moon. Of course, you couldn't do that today. That skit would be totally politically incorrect and abusive. So you couldn't do that on TV, but it was big in the 1950s. So it was on Dumont's Cavalcade of Stars that Ralph Cramden first threatened to send Alice to the moon. Dumont, first network soap opera, first network newscast. Oh, you know what? I got to get Cosell in here because he's got to introduce his old boss, Roone Arledge. Roone, get in here. I want you to tell these people about the original Saturday Night Football. Yeah, Roone Arledge. Roone Arledge was at Dumont. Roone Arledge came up with the concept of worldwide sports, or where the agony of it was the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. He also brought in the British Open on ABC. He had the Olympics on ABC, and he conceived of how you go about with Monday Night Football package, making it part sports and part entertainment. Well, he cuts his teeth at Dumont on the first live primetime telecast of the National Football League, which was on Saturday night back around 1951. Roone also was head of ABC News in the mid-1970s and brought Barbara Walters in as the first woman co-anchor of the evening news over at ABC. Dumont had Jackie Gleason before CBS, Bishop Sheehan before ABC, the original amateur hour before NBC. Unfortunately, Dumont didn't know how to run the television network, although whatever is left of Dumont is sitting at the Montclair State University in New Jersey campus. There's the Dumont studio, and you walk in there and they got a mock-up of the old TV, and they got a constant loop of whatever Dumont programming has survived to this day, and they got an old TV guide where somebody from Dumont is on the cover, and they kind of make it like it was 1950. Again. Dumont was a manufacturer of high quality television sets and equipment, but unfortunately is remembered as a purveyor of low budget programming, except there's something wrong with that. Most television back in the day was a purveyor of, most networks were and television stations were purveyors of low budget programming. They didn't put too much money into TV, and you can see the old kinescopes. A kinescope is actually somebody sitting there with a camera filming an image on TV to keep for posterity. You could see that on some of the old shows on, if you have Buzzer TV, and particularly on Saturday mornings when they run the old Price is Right from the 1950s and 60s with Bill Cullen, and they were shot with kinescope. And that's how things were kept. And Dumont had a lot of stuff on Kinescope, but it's gone. And I'll tell you why in a minute. The last non-sports program on Dumont was a game show called What's the Story? It was aired on September 23rd, 1955. Dumont had some football contracts with the NFL and also with college football. And they went on after the September 23rd date of the last non-sports programming on Dumont. They ended up on ABC or on NBC or CBS or maybe an independent station until the contracts were exhausted. What happened to the kinescopes that Dumont had? Well, after Dumont folded, there were many claims on many things from the television network, and there were fights and there were fights and there were fights. And one day a lawyer decided he couldn't deal with it anymore, and he decided to take things in his own hands, and he committed a crime against culture because he went up to the Bronx. There was a warehouse in the Bronx that had all the kinescopes of the Dumont shows, and he decided to load it up into a dump truck. And they took the dump truck and they ended up dumping all of the programming into the East River, where they joined the 7th series of the 1951 Topps baseball card set. Cy Berger didn't want to be stuck with those cards, so they returned them to Fox. He threw them to a dump truck, and they ended up on the bottom of the East River. So if you had the Mickey Mantle card from 1951 and it was in near perfect condition, you could get $250,000 for that card. Unfortunately, whatever is left of the Dumont network is not very good. Gleason kept some of the Cavalcade of Stars, but most of the stuff that's left is kind of sophomoric, really sophomoric. But it was a piece of cultural history from the 1950s. And a lot of that stuff is gone from the 50s. Now, I don't know how many of you remember the comedian Henny Youngman. Henny Youngman was the king of the one-liners, and I have a friend, because he's still alive. He's 94 years old. He lives in Reno, Nevada, and his name is Robert Block, Bob Block, who is the father of pay TV in the United States with the Wometco Home Theater, which debuted around 1972. And that was a pay TV service, as opposed to HBO, which went on to a cable service back then. There were 44,000 television sets in use in the United States when Henny Youngman gets a call from his agent. Bob Block told me the story. Bob Block ran a comedy club in Milwaukee. He was also an advertising guy in Milwaukee. Two of his clients in the 1950s at his advertising shop, one of them was a local grocery store called Kohl's. I don't know if you ever heard of Kohl's or see Kohl's today. It kind of started in Milwaukee. That's where it started. The other was for a Ford dealership owned by a guy named Selig. Excuse me here for a second. Sorry about that. Selig, who ended up getting a lot of money and a big name in Milwaukee. And his son was a big baseball fan and eventually would own a piece of the Milwaukee Braves and the Milwaukee Brewers and would become the baseball commissioner, Bud Selig. So Bob worked with both of them, the Cole family, Senator Herbert Cole, eventually in Wisconsin, and Bud Selig, eventually the baseball commissioner. I think he was Herb Cole's fraternity brother. But anyway, so Bob's telling me the story about Henny Youngman, and he says that Henny is told by his agent, hey, you may have a TV job if you're interested in it, but there's a problem with it. He said the TV job would be the same day that you're doing a royal performance for the King and Queen of England and also Princess Elizabeth. Now, he said, I'm not going to tell you what to do because there aren't many TV sets in the United States. And, frankly, we don't know if this thing is going to catch on. We'll be back to that in a minute. The longest running show on TV started back in 1947, November 6, 1947. Now, normally when I'm live with you, well, let's try this out. You could always print it in or type it out in the box. What is the longest running show on TV, continuous show on TV in the United States that started on November 6, 1947? Give me a couple seconds to answer. if you want to. All right, let's put the pens down and let's answer that. That is Martha Roundtree. And Martha Roundtree invented or came up with the idea of Meet the Press in 1943. She was working for Mutual Radio, an outfit that I worked for before it folded back in the 1980s, 1990s. And she comes up with this idea in 1943, and it goes to TV on November 6, 1947, from Mutual Broadcasting System to NBC. She kind of paid for the show, and so she put up money and kind of made the money back. She eventually would have a partner by the name of Lawrence Spivak, who would buy her out. One thing about journalism in the late 1930s and 1940s, women had juice in journalism. Claire Hollingsworth was with the BBC back in August and September of 1939, and she was positioned on the German-Polish border. Wasn't TV, it was radio, but she was the first one to report that Germany invaded Poland to start World War II. Ruth Gruber up here in New York. She recently passed away. She was about 102 years old. She was a photojournalist, and she was one of the first photojournalists ever to take pictures of the concentration camps after they were liberated by the West during World War II. Pauline Frederick, who did go on television eventually, she was in the Pacific Theater, and she was going around doing interviews and talking to people in the war setting, the Pacific Theater in the 1940s. So it shouldn't have been too surprising that it was a woman who came up with the idea of Meet the Press, Martha Roundtree. Spivak would buy her out. He would stay on NBC, eventually become a salaried employee, and Roundtree went over to the Dumont Network. Ed Sullivan. Toast of the Town starts in 1948. You don't know this, but I'm going to tell you this. Jerry Stiller and Mira. You might remember Stiller and Mira, the comedy team. Well, Jerry's my cousin, and his son Ben was named after Uncle Benny in Brooklyn. And Uncle Benny was a stout man, always wore a tie. Why did he wear a tie? Because he had a tie clip on. Why the significance of the tie clip? He had the letters B and S, big letters B and S, right here on his chest, telling the world what he thought. And Ben Stiller was named after Uncle Benny. But he told me some stories about Sullivan. One of the stories I'll tell you now is when Jerry and Ann were on, and Anna Marie Alberghetti was the guest. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Sullivan Show, because it was segmented before TV actually segmented and worried about the 18 to 34-year-old audience, or the 18 to 49, or 25 to 54. He had something for everybody. The early part of the show, Topio Gigio, it was for kids. The next part of the show, for teenagers, you might get Elvis on, or you might get Johnny Ray or somebody of that ilk back in the 1950s. And certainly here, ladies and gentlemen, here they are, the Beatles. And then you get a comic on for young adults, or adults that were empty nesters. I don't know if they had that term in those days. So you'd have the comics on. You'd go up to the Borscht Belt, which is 90 miles from New York City, look at the talent up there, the comedy, the comedians up there, and put them on the show. Or he'd get plate spinners from up there. That's where he got his talent, up at Kutcher's in the Concord Hotel, and Grossinger's and some of the other places up there, Brown's, that's where Jerry Lewis was. And he would have, for the baby boomers, he'd have, not baby boomers, for the empty nesters, he would have the Nat King Coles and the Frank Sinatras and the Tony Bennett's and Ella Fitzgerald's. And then for the seniors, he'd have the Jimmy Durantes, the Eddie Cantors, and people from the 1920s. So Anna Marie Alberghetti is on, because Broadway is dark on Sunday nights, so you could easily do the Sullivan Show on Sunday nights. So she comes on, and she sings a song from whatever play that she's in, and she's getting, and slow clapping. Audience wasn't impressed. And Ed is yelling, come on, come on, come on, come on, come on, let's hear it. Come on, let's hear it. Come on, let's hear it. No, come on, you get the back. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Let's hear it for Ave Maria. It's much better in person. Much better in person. Jerry also told me one of the reasons that Ed went like that was he's watching his watch, so he see how quick or slow the acts were going. He was a boxing ring announcer for the amateur Golden Gloves tournament at Madison Square Garden in the 1920s when he started out as a sports writer for the Daily News. So the thing would come down like that in this corner, in that corner. What you're watching was a guy who had no idea what to do on TV. So he went back to his ring announcing days at Madison Square Garden in the mid 1920s. And that's what you saw. Ed Sullivan, ring announcer, except he's introducing acts. Jerry also said that Ed was involved watching every act, and they made suggestions to, quote unquote, have a proper act. The Rolling Stones were on, what was the song? Let's Spend the Night Together. And Sullivan's people said, no, that's not going to fly. It's going to be, let's spend some time together. And one of the great eye rolls of all time on TV is Mick Jagger when he's singing, let's spend some time together, like that. You could clearly see Mick. He's not happy about singing that lyric, but it's Sullivan's show and they needed the exposure in the United States. So let's get back to Henny Youngman, the Texaco Star Theater. They, NBC decides, hey, let's move it to TV. And Henny Youngman, we'll try him out. Yeah, sure, we'll try him out. One line or something. And Henny is now faced with a decision. Now, let me ask you if you want to type it in. I don't know if you want to type this in or not, but you could if you want. If you're Henny Youngman and you're listening to your agent, but you're making the decision, not the agent, do you keep the royal performance in England? Remember, Henny's born in Liverpool, England. Or do you roll the dice on a television show? And there are 80,000 TVs, although it's growing to nearly 500,000 by this point. What do you do? And this, by the way, is the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, 2017. Spoke on a cruise ship. I was doing the Great Lakes itinerary, so we went to the Henry Ford Museum. So anyway, if you want to answer it, I'll give you 5 seconds. If you're Henny Youngman, do you do the Texaco show or do you do the royal performance before the Princess of England, soon to be the Queen of England? Yes or no? I'll give you 5 seconds. Okay, we got an answer here. Okay, let's see what the answer is. Monica would do royalty. That is exactly what Henny did. He did royalty. And he kicked himself afterwards because this guy became Mr. Television. His name is Milton Berle. Now, I have a friend by the name of Larry Strickler, who's now retired in Florida, although he gives talks. Larry does give talks, and one of his talks is about Milton Berle. And he was on the Milton Berle show. And Larry and I, Larry was up in the Catskill Mountains. He was kind of the MC of programs, and I was invited up to give a talk up there and for a few years up at Kutcher's, and he introduced me. And so we sat down and we were talking about the Berle show. And I told him the story about Henny Youngman. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea about that. But he said, you know what? In retrospect, Henny Youngman would have been a lousy host of our show. Larry was a child actor on the show. He said, Milton was a pain. He was a perfectionist. He knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted you to do exactly what he wanted. He had a photographic memory. He knew what he was doing. He said, I don't think Henny could do that. Besides, Henny probably wanted to look good in a dress because Milton was in a dress. The Texaco Star Theater, big time winner for NBC. To this day, it's largely credited with driving television set sales, although television was coming on city to city to city. Detroit, for instance, got its first television in 1947. The Berle, during the run of the Berle show, it went from about 500,000 televisions to 30 million in 1956 when the show ended. Milton Berle got a lifetime contract from NBC. And in 1986, I was working for this amalgamation between Mutual Radio and NBC Radio because NBC was taking over Mutual. And I was up at 1700 Broadway in Manhattan. And I was doing something, this is 1986. I was doing a report or something for NBC Sports. And I'm in the waiting room, waiting to go in to use a facility, the studio, and Burl's in there. And Burl is really, really nice to me. It's the only time I ever met him. And I said, what are you doing here? He said, well, we're doing a 60th anniversary of NBC. NBC Radio started in 1926. And he said, I'm just here to listen to old stuff or view some old stuff. And yeah, they want my word on it. And also, Burl was contractually obligated to NBC because he had a lifetime deal because of that show. Even though he would show up on other networks, they were still paying him because he made so much money from the network back in those days. The Texaco Star Theater, by the way, Burl was very nice to me, which is unusual because most people will tell you he wasn't. He was a tough guy, they told me. Texaco Star Theater was the highest rated television show of the 50-51 television season. That was the first year the Nielsen ratings were used. Now, 1950, Ed Sullivan's on for 2 years, and NBC comes up with this revolutionary type show. It's going to be on against Sullivan on Sunday nights at about 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock Central Time. And it's called the Colgate Comedy Hour. And well, let's talk a little bit about, look at that. There are going to be 3 separate production areas. One is from New York. Eddie Cantor is hosting the 20-minute segment from New York. These guys are at the height of their popularity in 1950. That's Martin and Lewis. They would start sliding after this, but they got great ratings in their 20-minute segment out of Los Angeles. And there's Bud Abbott and Lou Costello. They were in Chicago, and they didn't do well on the ratings. One, they were thoroughly overexposed by this point. They had been living off the Who's on First, What's on Second routine since 1938. It was debuted on the Kate Smith Show in March of 1938. They went on to movies, and then one of the big things in their movies was the Niagara Falls skid, Slowly I Come, Step by Step. They were on TV. The old movies were on TV. They were all over the place, and they were overexposed. But this show has its place in history because in 1950-51, AT&T started a coast-to-coast telecast, or the ability to go coast-to-coast using some of this coaxial wire and a microwave interconnection, and they were able to hook up New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. I did this talk in Tenafly, New Jersey about 2 years ago, and there was this guy in his 90s, and he was telling me that he was an engineer and he worked in television in the 1950s. Sharp guy, really sharp guy. And he starts telling me about how they did all this thing. And I looked at him and I said, you know what I am? He said, what's that? He said, I'm talent. I said, I'm talent. So I'm the last to know and the first to go. And he laughed. He said, exactly. He said, we guys in engineering, we had jobs for life. You guys, you lasted a year. That was a lot. Anyway, so the production units were set up in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. They were able to hook up that into a seamless show, which was a big deal at the time. And the show had talent. But in the end, Eddie Cantor was big in the 1920s with Making Whoopee and and Bye Bye Blackbird and being in plays and movies. But he was big in the 1920s and 30s. Costello, Abbott and Costello, they were overexposed, and so in a way was the Lewis Martin comedy team, but they went into movies. The show had talent, but in the end, Ed beat them. I want to call it TV. I want to call it TV. I want to call it TV. Buffalo Bob Smith, Howdy Doody show. One of the first shows specifically for children ever shown in color. Started out in black and white in 1947, December 27, 1947. Captain Kangaroo, Bob Keeshan, was the first Clarabelle the Clown. Very popular show, the Peanut Gallery and all that. Buffalo Bob lived about 5 miles north of me over in Scarsdale. You could tell his house back in the day when he lived there because he had a big totem pole right in the middle of his lawn, and there were always kids around, and Buffalo Bob would entertain them when he was around. He'd come out, they'd give him refreshments, water, and all that other stuff when he would happen to be in town, Buffalo Bob Smith. The show was done in color eventually. Why? Because it was on NBC. And NBC was owned by the Radio Corporation of America, and they manufactured televisions. And among the televisions they manufactured, color TV. And they wanted the kids to nag their parents, buy the TV, buy the TV, buy the TV. Now, there was a little movement in the United States in the 50s where people got the screen that they put over the TV that kind of reflected some of the black and white that was on the TV screen and came out of some sort of prism-like color, but it really didn't work. It really didn't work at all. If you want to see color, you had to buy color TV. And where'd you buy the TVs? Generally at appliance stores. And there was a guy in the Poconos in eastern Pennsylvania in the Poconos Mountains that wanted to sell TVs. Now take a look at these guys. I surmise that these guys are watching either the World Series, but it looks like it's a little too cold for the World Series at that point. So maybe they're watching a college football game or an NFL game on the weekend, and they're standing in front of a television, an appliance store that happened to feature televisions. And that's the way a lot of people watch television in the late 1940s or early 1950s. You couldn't do that in South Dakota. You didn't have TV in South Dakota. But you might have bought a TV from a place like that, hoping for the day you get TV. And they seem really into it. And that woman there is just walking away, and it looks like they're watching a baseball game or a football game. I'm not sure which. There's no caption to this picture, but they are watching it at an appliance store. These things happen. Remember these things back then? Hang on, let me adjust the thing here. Okay, I did. Okay. Cable TV. There are two stories about the start of cable TV. It is claimed that the first cable television system was created in 1948 in Mahoney City, Pennsylvania by a guy by the name of John Walson, who became a big deal in cable television in the 70s and 80s. My friend Frank Carney was a lobbyist in Pennsylvania, up in Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania, to get Walson's, get whatever he wants for his cable company in Pennsylvania. So he runs an appliance store, and he has a problem because he's trying to sell TVs, and there's Stone Mountain behind him. And Stone Mountain is kind of blocking the signals out of Philadelphia from KYW Channel 3 in Philadelphia, and also WFIL, FIL Channel 6 in Philadelphia, and also WCAU Channel 10 in Philadelphia. Stone Mountain's blocking it. So he's not getting a clear signal in the store. So John can't sell his televisions. But he comes up with an idea one day. Hey, what if I go to an Army Navy surplus store and get some wiring and take an antenna and place it on top of the mountain and then run the wiring down trees, because my store is would be at the end of where the wiring is, and then hook it up to a couple of the TVs. I don't have any of that kind of wiring in front of me. I would show you the wiring, but I don't have it right in front of me. Anyway, so he's trying to increase his sales in 1947. So he does get some heavy duty twine lead Army surplus wire. And he runs the wire from the hotel down the trees into his appliance store, and voila, he's got a clear picture from Channel 3, from Channel 6, and Channel 10. And people are into it and say, yeah, we'll buy the TV. Can you guarantee us that? He said, I can guarantee you that. I'll run the wire from the antenna into your house. And that is the start of community antenna television, as several homes along the way were connected to the community antenna. Oddly enough, it wasn't until the mid-1960s that all of Allentown, Pennsylvania, where he was, around there, Mahoney City, was wired for cable TV. The other story is in Astoria, Washington, and I was in Astoria, Washington in 2018. I travel a lot. So I'm out there, I'm visiting my daughter. My daughter lives in Seattle, says, why don't we go down to Oregon? And you've never gone through Oregon. So why don't we go down there? We'll go to Portland, we'll go to Astoria. And we do. And I am on this train in Astoria. It's two restored old, not cabooses. They're two restored cars. And there's a little engine in front. So you get the little engine in front with the guy there and the two restored cars. And it's about 1.75 miles from one end of the town to the other end of the town. And Astoria is at the confluence of the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean. Okay, that's where it ends. So it's always a marine layer. It's always no less than 50 degrees, no more than 62 degrees, and the sun comes out about 2 hours a day. Doesn't matter what the season is. It's a town founded by John Jacob Astor. So I'm on this train, and we passed that building there. And the conductor who gives the tour of the city on that 1.1 3/4 mile thing, they also shot a movie on the Columbia River, which he talked about. And he said, that's where cable TV is starting. I said, hey, wait a minute. My friend Frank Carney worked with John Walston in the Poconos. That's where he claimed it was started. And the guy said, no, it was started there. It was started in that building over there. And I asked him why, and he gave me a story. And I looked up the story, and here it is. There was a radio station operator by the name of Ed Parsons in town. And he goes to a radio convention in Chicago in 1946, and Chicago has a couple stations on. So somebody has a TV in there, and they're watching WKBK Channel 2 in Chicago. And Ed and his wife Grace walk by the television set, and they're kind of interested, particularly Grace. And so, to make a long story short, somehow there is a TV that is purchased and ends up in Astoria, Oregon. But there's no TV station there until 1948. This is taking place in 1946. And Grace Parsons is just waiting and waiting and waiting for the day that television comes out to the Pacific Northwest. And it does, KRSC TV. It's about 80 miles away from Seattle. It's filled with mountains down there. And you would figure it'd be really tough for a Seattle signal to get down to Astoria, Oregon. But it does, because Parsons, who knows how to play around with signals, because he got the radio antenna and radio tower, pulls in the signal from Seattle. And it does reach Seattle, from Seattle. And he calls his wife, Grace. Grace, guess what? Guess what? Guess what? We have TV. We got TV? Yeah, we got TV. Okay, cool, we got TV. So Grace goes down to the office, loves it, says, well, what do you think? Can we get it in the house? Yeah, they get another TV, split the signal. It's in the office in the house. And so they got TV. And Grace decides to tell everybody in the neighborhood they got TV. And this is a big problem for Ed, because he loses his kitchen. He loses his dining room. He loses his living room. And most important, he loses his bathroom. And he's got to figure out something, because he's got to get these people out of there. So he decides, listen, I think I could get you TV. Why don't you all go buy a TV? When you all have your TVs, put them in your house, and I'll see if I can run a wire to them. He does, charges them $3 a month, and apparently that's the start of cable TV as well. Of course, Ed never told the Federal Communications Commission about it, because he owned a radio station, and in effect, he's stealing a TV signal. Not only could he lose his radio station, but he could get in trouble for stealing intellectual property. But he never told anybody, and apparently the FCC never cared about what was going on in Astoria, Oregon. So for years, he collected $3 a month from his neighbors so they could watch TV, and then they got television closer to Astoria. 1948, CBS television debuts the CBS Evening News with Douglas Edwards. The first network telecasts from a political convention occur on June 21st out of Philadelphia. And on June 29th, the BBC starts its coverage of the 1948 Olympic Games in London. Now, I have finished a separate talk on Lucy and Desi, which came out of this talk. They formed Desi-Lou in 1950. Lucy is on a popular radio show, My Favorite Husband, and CBS comes over to her and says, we'd like to do that on TV. And she says, yeah, I'll do it on TV, but under the condition that Desi is my husband. CBS balked at that because he's Cuban and it would be an interracial marriage and you couldn't do that in 1951. Lucy would finally prevail. The reason why she wanted Desi, she wanted to get him off the road because he was a philanderer and she wanted to make her marriage work, and she figured, well, Desi will be around, so that'll end his wandering eye. 1950, Desi-Lou Productions formed. By Lucy and Desi. They go on kind of a vaudeville hop around the country to prove to CBS that they could work together. The I Love Lucy show starts in 1951, and it's revolutionary in many, many ways. They start the practice of syndication and reruns. It was shot on film so you could sell it again. They did a whole bunch of things, and I go in depth with the talk I do on Lucy breaking the glass ceiling. Jack Benny came over from radio to TV on CBS. I loved the Benny Show on radio. I got hooked on the Benny Show on radio in 1978 at my 500-watt radio station. We had a 2-hour block of radio, the theater of the imagination. And you could imagine everything going on the Benny Show. You looked at the Benny Show on TV, it's a 56-year-old guy. Well, the 39-year-old joke could get away, but the rest of the jokes just fell flat, although he was on TV for about 14 years. Tell them Groucho sent you. You Bet Your Life was on TV. It was a Groucho venture. It was not a game show. It was Groucho with a couple of questions thrown in there. And there's Fenneman, the Margaret Dumont of the quiz show era. Once Fenneman, well, let's do it Fenneman style. Groucho Marx meets Marion and Charlotte Story. They have 20 children. Marion and Charlotte Story meet Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx said to Charlotte Story, why'd she choose to have such a large family? To which Story said, I love my husband. To which Groucho said, I love my cigar, but I take it out of my mouth every once in a while. Had a woman in Tarrytown, New York. She's in her 70s, and she goes like that to her husband. What's he mean? What's he mean? Shh, tell you later. Whether this happened or not is subject to conjecture. Groucho said it never happened, and Groucho said it did happen. It was on radio. It wasn't on TV. It was on radio, KGO radio, where the show was taped. Fenneman never said anything about it. It sounds like something Groucho could say, but there's no proof that Groucho ever said it, so it may be one of those great urban legends, but it's a cool story. I Love Lucy was one of the top shows in the 1950s. The Tonight Show, which you might watch today, or The Late Show, which you might watch today, or The Kimmel Show, which you may watch today, their roots are in 1950. Sigourney Weaver's father, Sylvester Pat Weaver, who was an advertising executive, came up with an idea for a late night show for NBC. It was called Broadway Open House. It's the template for what you see today. Jerry Lester and Maury Amsterdam were the hosts. Maury left the show, leaving Jerry Lester with a woman by the name of Jenny Lewis, who he called Dagmar. For whatever reason, he called Dagmar. And a couple of years ago, I was over in Glen Cove, New York, doing this talk at an Atria Senior Center. And there was this guy in his 90s going, now I got scared because here's a guy, who I said to him, you okay? Because I thought I was going to have to call somebody to deal with him, and that'd be the end of the talk and me getting out of there. But anyway, he said, no. He said, she was the best breather on TV. The best breather on TV. Oh yeah, I love watching her breathe. Then another guy was telling me, he's going like that with his hands. I said, you should be ashamed of yourself. How old are you? 92. He says, does your mother know about this? Please don't tell her. And there she is. Dagmar, the Kim Kardashian of her era. She had two assets that she used, two assets. Show didn't last very long. It lasted 2 years, but she went from $75 a week to making $1,250 a week on that show, which lasted 2 years. But she left an imprint, an impression on American society in the 1950s because there were some engineers over at General Motors that made the Coupe de Ville, they made Chevrolets, and they decided to fancy up their cars. And how they do that? Well, look at the bumpers. Look at the bumpers. There are two nose cones coming out of there. They don't have any place there. They were just there. The engineers named them the Dagmar bumpers, named after Jenny Lewis or Dagmar. People who are into cars know all about the Dagmar bumpers. Bum, ba, bum, 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 ba, bum, bum, ba. The story about the sea is true. Only the names have been changed to protect the innocent. It's Dragnet, Sergeant Friday, badge 714. Dragnet was on for 8 years. It was enduring. Version 2 was on for 3 years, from 67 to 70. It had high ratings. The recognizable theme song, and Sergeant Joe Friday, who was immortalized in the Stoller and Lieber song by the Coasters called Searching, along with Charlie Chan and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and Sergeant York and all those other great, Charlie Chan and all those other great detectives. Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Dragnet was one of the most popular shows in the 1950s, but you don't see them much around. You see the 1967 color version. If you watch the Today Show, I don't know how many of you are watching the Today Show, but you're watching a show that has not changed in 69 years. Well, the hosts have changed. Dave Garroway, J. Fred Muggs, who officially was known as the show's mascot, but he was one of the hosts of the show back then. 1952, the Today Show blended national news headlines, interviews with newsmakers, lifestyle features, other light news and gimmicks, and local news updates, weather updates from the network stations. The only difference between then and now, it was 2 hours then, it's 4 hours now. Now, if you were in South Dakota, you missed all this. So you had to eventually go buy a TV, and KELO, the owners of the radio station, KELO, told you, go buy a TV because we're coming onto TV. Listen to the radio station and watch for KELO TV, the first application for a television station made by those owners. Oh yeah, contact your local appliance store to go buy a TV. On May 2nd, 1952, Joe L. Floyd and his partners purchased the radio station KELO Radio, and they also got a construction permit for a television station. On May 19th, 1953, Channel 11, KELO TV signed on the air. It was South Dakota's first TV station. Primarily, they got The Burl Show, the NBC affiliates, but they also took programming, maybe Beulah, the Queen of the Kitchen from ABC, or maybe the Ed Sullivan Show from CBS, or from Dumont, maybe the football games from Dumont. The two most, probably the best known, nationally known television figures from South Dakota are Tom Brokaw and Mary Hart. And TV would eventually start in South Dakota on Channel 11, KELO TV, first with the best in the upper Midwest. January 17th, the first live shows came on. What the old formula was grab a show which was floating around Kinerscope, just throw it on whenever you could. The news, the weather, sports, and local commercials were live instead of being shown on film, and local shows would start as well, like this one, Captain 11, a children's show. Dave Dietrich's Captain 11 Summer Replacement Kid Show became the longest continuously running children's show in the world. Started March 7th, 1955, ended December 27th, 41 years ago, almost 42 years ago, in 1996. The show played cartoons. They featured the captain having the kids, his crew, introduce themselves on the air. guessing to win a toy chest. I tried to do that when we were living in Florida with Skipper Chuck. What they did in Florida when I was 3 years old was they gave you a key to open the toy chest, and my key didn't work. And children with birthdays working the captain's control panel of lights and switches. So that was the longest running show. Educational TV would start in 1954. National Education Television Network operated from May 16, 1954 to October 7th, 1970. It was owned by the Ford Foundation, later co-owned by the Corporation for Public Broadcast. It was founded in November of 1952 as the Educational Television and Radio Center from Ford Foundation Fund for Adult Education. By the way, it would be Fred Rogers who would save public television and get money from Congress to spend on public TV after convincing legislators that public television was necessary. Originally, it was like KELO in Channel 11, because all it did was an exchange and distribution of educational television programs. The company would move to Ann Arbor, from Ann Arbor to New York in 1958. It did not produce any material itself. The Romper Rooms. I didn't particularly like Romper Room. I watched it. It wasn't my speed, I suppose. Romper, Bumper, Stomper, Boo. Tell me who. It was Mr. Doobie. I remember Mr. Doobie. Mr. Doobie says, do this. Mr. Dopey says, do that. It was syndicated around the country from 1953 to 1994. It was created by Bert Kessler, and Kessler and his wife, Nancy, was the original presenter. Individual markets. There were, Miss So-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so. Each program opened with a greeting from the hostess and a pledge of allegiance, and each one ended with her holding up a mirror, and they had some sound effect or not sound effect, visual effect, and the mirror would allow you to see the hostess eyes. Steve Allen took over the time slot that Broadway Open House left. He had the first Tonight Show, and there's Steve in the bottom right. There's Don Knotts, Louis Nye, Tom Poston. The Man in the Street featured Don Knotts as the nervous Mr. Morrison, who looked a lot like Barney Fife. Tom Poston was the man who could not remember his name. Pat Harrington was an Italian golfer by the name of Guido Panizzi. Louis Nye was the smug Gordon Hathaway, and Bill Dana. My name is Jose Jimenez. He dropped that in 1972. My friend, the late Shelley Saltman, went to school with Bill's brother, who was a doctor in Boston. Jose Jimenez was politically incorrect in Dana's mind by 1972. Elvis sang to a hound dog on Steve Allen's show, complete with being a high-class musician, complete with a top hat and white tie, and the Basset Hound was dressed up as well. Jack Parr took over for Steve Allen. He lasted about 5 years, preceded Carson. He got in trouble for telling a joke about a WC, a water closet, or a bathroom in London. Dick Clark took over Bandstand on a local station in Philadelphia, WFIL Channel 6. It started out as a big band show, and it changed its emphasis to teens dancing and popular records by the time Dick Clark got there in 1956. The very weak ABC, American Broadcasting Company, owned by Paramount, picked up the show. They were looking to put anything on in 1957 of quality. Bandstand they picked up. Paramount owned ABC. Oh, Bandstand, July 23rd, 1956, Channel 6, WFIL, out of the blue, with no fanfare, broadcast that show in color. It was a 2.5-hour show from 2:30 to 5 p.m. It was the first color cast on a regular basis. NBC, full color TV, WNBQ, Channel 5, now known as WMAQ, in Chicago, April 15th, 1956 at 4:15 in the afternoon. Robert W. Sarnoff, then the president of NBC, pushed the button and ushered in a new era in television. Channel 5 Chicago became the first world's first all-color TV station, as Wide Wide World carried the event to 110 NBC-affiliated stations across the country. So what happened all the time when you were watching? Oh, I know why that happened. They had to switch. That's my wife. 1982. We're in LA or Anaheim, the Magic Kingdom, Disneyland. And why would I be showing my wife in 1982 at the Magic Kingdom color picture in Anaheim? Well, very simple. Walt Disney was looking to build an amusement park. And in those days, amusement parks were everywhere. In Queens, where I lived, there were two nearby my house in Woodside. They weren't big, but they had the rides. There was Ride Playland. There was Freedom Land. They were all over. There was Palisades Amusement Park across the Hudson in New Jersey. So they were everywhere. MGM owned Palisades Amusement Park for a time. In 1954, ABC had 14 stations, CBS 74, NBC 71. ABC, owned by Paramount, was a weak network. And Walt Disney is going around, looking for people to put up money for his Disneyland project. But what happened was nobody seemed to be interested except for Paramount. They put up some money. They built Disneyland in Anaheim, but they had to get two shows from Disney. The Mouse That Roared, the Mouse the House built, or the House the Mouse built, Mickey Mouse. So Walt says, yeah, give me the money and you could have two shows, Disneyland and Mickey Mouse Club. ABC would become profitable because of the Mickey Mouse Club. Eventually they would buy TV shows, Westerns, detective series, like from Desi Lou and Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball, The Untouchables. Rod Serling came on in CBS. Actually, Desi Lou shot the pilot for Rod Serling, who took it to CBS and got a show on between 1959 and 1964. Rod Serling used storytelling to explore the human condition and culture of his time, the Twilight Zone. You couldn't do this show today. That's Imogene Coca and Sid Caesar. Sid Caesar, the star of your show of shows. Here's why you couldn't do it. You couldn't pay these people. Oh, that guy Mel Brooks came back again. Whatever happened to Mel Brooks? Neil Simon, Danny Simon, Mel Tonkin, Lucille Kellen, Selma Diamond, Joseph Stein, Michael Stewart, Tony Webster, Carl Reiner, Larry Gelbart, Woody Allen. You couldn't pay these people, although in those days you probably paid them $500 a script. They were all on that show, as Carl Reiner was quoted once saying, we were all young once, even that guy Mel Brooks, whoever he is. Nat King Cole. Well, Nat King Cole called himself the Jackie Robinson of television. He had a television show. It was on NBC, Tuesday nights, 8 o'clock. Replaced Milton Berle at the time slot. Jackie couldn't get advertisers. Rather, Jackie. Nat King Cole couldn't get advertisers. But he wasn't the first African-American to host the television show. That was Hazel Scott on Dumont and Billy Daniels. He had been a frequent guest on your show of shows. His show started in 1956, but he couldn't get national sponsors. He had some local sponsors. The show's over December 17th, 1957. Cole sings The Party's Over. There's a montage of the people who were on the show, including Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, Harry Belafonte, and Sammy Davis Jr. He could have gone on. The Singer Sewing Machine Company wanted that 8 o'clock time slot, Eastern time on Tuesday night, for yet another Western called The Californians. David Sarnoff said Saturday night, 7 o'clock. Nat said, nope, no audience there. And so he was gone. Hazel Scott, she was blacklisted. First African-American woman ever to host a show. She was on 15 minutes a week on the Dumont Network, but she was outed as a communist. She appeared on the House Un-American Activities Committee, and she defended herself, but her sponsors were gone, and Dumont canceled her show. There was more ethnicity in the early days of TV. Beulah, Queen of the Kitchen, they moved from CBS Radio, the show, to ABC. There were 4 Buellers altogether: Ethel Waters, Hattie McDaniel, The show lasted 2 years on ABC. Amos and Andy went from radio into TV, this time with Black actors playing Amos and Andy. That started on CBS June 1951, ended April 53, 52 episodes. Sponsored by Blatz Brewing Company of Milwaukee. There was an NAACP boycott of the show because they did not like how Amos and Andy and Kingfish and all the rest of the characters were portrayed. Blatz pulls out of sponsorship. Nobody else goes in. The show is done in June of 1953. And they had 52 shows, and it did well in the ratings. Some of the women on TV, Dinah Shore, See the USA in Your Chevrolet. Betty White recently celebrated her 99th birthday. She was on KNBH, Channel 4 in Los Angeles. Eve Arden, our Miss Brooks, She Can't Get Her Man. Gail Storm is My Little Margie. That's Ann Southern. Ann Southern, she was an executive secretary, which was a Desi Lou show. Donna Reed, she was the first woman, wife, who was really the center of the family. Donna Reed show. Yoo-hoo, Mrs. Goldberg. There's Gertrude Berg and Philip Loeb. She brings the show from radio to TV. Gertrude Berg played Molly Goldberg. It was the first situation comedy on TV. Red Channel started outing who they thought were communists. The show was killed because Philip Loeb was accused of being a communist. Gertrude Berg held on as long as she could to Philip Loeb. She did slip money his way after he was ousted from the show. Show stumbled without him on NBC and Dumont. He eventually would commit suicide because he couldn't work because of the blacklist. Arthur Duncan was on the Betty White show. Sponsors loved Betty White. Network loved Betty White, but they didn't like Arthur Duncan and told that to Betty White. Betty White said, if you don't like Arthur Duncan, you don't like me. Show is gone. Betty quits. There was an array of cowboy and Indian shows. There's Maverick, Playhouse 90, Gary Moore, a daytime show. Former sidekick to Jimmy Durante on radio. He had a nighttime show, which actually starred Carol Burnett. He did I've Got a Secret. Art Linkletter had shows. There were soap operas, variety shows. But you couldn't be pregnant on TV. Couldn't be pregnant on TV, but Lucy was pregnant. You couldn't say pregnant on TV. CBS censors said the word is too obscene, even though they were married. They were married on the show, and actually TV parents had to be shown underneath the covers in separate beds. Mary Tyler Moore wore pants. Lucy actually wore pants, but Mary Tyler Moore wore pants on the Dick Van Dyke Show in 1960, and that was a no-no. And Mary Tyler Moore, said, I had Laura wear pants because I said women don't wear full-skirted dresses to vacuum in. CBS said, we're afraid that housewives are going to be a little annoyed because she looks so good in pants. Carl Reiner, the show's creator, was told, don't let her wear pants, but she could do it in one episode. He promised the network they wouldn't let Laura wear pants. We went along with that for about 3 episodes, and then I said, I'm just wearing pants. She wore pants. Oh, please stand by. Oh, I know why we had to stand by, because there's Maynard G. Krebs, the first beatnik, or portrayed the beatnik on television, and he was pretty good at that. He depicted elements of the 1959 so-called counterculture on The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, the Beat Generation. Was he the prototype of the 1960s hippie? No, because we don't know what a 1960s hippie is. They were never defined. But Maynard has a goatee, wears a ripped sweatshirt, has a love of jazz, and uses the like vocabulary. Quiz shows were wired. This particular quiz show, 21, Herb Stempel, and one of his relatives lives down the block from me, took a dive, and he told Jack O'Brien in the Journal American, a New York newspaper in 1957, he took a dive. Ooh, please stand by. We got to fix that, don't we? Oh, there's Maynard G. Krebs. Anyway, he takes a dive. The American quiz show scandals of the 1950s. There were revelations that people took dives. Jack Barry said, the host of one of those shows, what did we do that was wrong? You know, we're entertainment. We paid, they took a dive, we paid them. That's all it is, entertainment. In 1960, Congress amended the Communications Act of 1934 to prohibit the fixing of quiz shows. Bob Barker hosted Truth or Consequences back in those days. Game shows have more rules. This is Jeopardy! And how Jeopardy started was simple. Merv Griffin was with Goodson Todman. He was the host of Play Your Hunch, and he wanted to get into the game show business, but didn't know how to get around the quiz show scandals because his was a quiz show. And he's riding around with his wife, Jillian, one day. He says, how do I do it? She said, give them the answers, let them ask the questions. Merv didn't understand. She said, 5,280 feet. He said, that's a mile. And they go on and on. Light bulb goes on in Merv's head. That's how we're going to do it. Jeopardy starts 1964. It was off for about 7 years. It's back on now. It's John Cameron Swayze who became the epitome of the anchor man. That starts in 1949. The makers of Camel cigarettes bring the world's latest news events right into your own living room. Sit back, light up a Camel, and be an eyewitness to the happenings that made history in the last 24 hours. Network news, the network news is the same today as it was on February 16th, 1949, except there was some censorship. NBC News reports were not allowed to show no smoking signs. The only news figure permitted to be seen smoking a cigar was Winston Churchill. The sponsor, Camel, their parent company, R.J. Reynolds, NBC wanted to know, can we do reports from Korea on the Korean War? For some reason, R.J. Reynolds said no. Edward R. Murrow, he brought down Joe McCarthy in 1954. See it now, March 9th, 1954. Murrow used McCarthy's words against him. McCarthy wants equal time. He gets it in April. On the show, McCarthy faces off against Murrow. Murrow eviscerates him, and McCarthyism starts to fade by 1954. Murrow would never have the free reign he did at CBS after that. His last show, it was in 1960, Harvest of Shame. Bill Paley, the CBS chairman of the board, told Murrow, we have the last right, or we have reserved the right to edit the show after you. Murrow said, no, I'll pay for it. He paid for it, put it on. It was about California migrant workers, 1960. Speed ahead to 2021. You could run it today. This changes presidential and political politics. Does he look presidential? It is the first debate of 4 between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon. 1960 presidential election. Look at Kennedy, every hair in place. He's wearing a suit to match the backdrop. Howard K. Smith is the moderator. And look at Nixon. He's got a 5 o'clock shadow. He is sweating profusely. His knee, he hurt his knee. He looks like he was on the New York City subway system, the IRT on 6th Avenue on July 23rd, 1960. It's 95 degrees in Manhattan. Inside the cars, it's 125 degrees. You're packed like sardines, and the humidity is 90%. And that's what you look like when you get out. And he does not look presidential. Kennedy does. In college, I had to watch and listen to that debate. And Nixon wins the debate talking, theory of the imagination. Kennedy wins the debate visually. TV becomes a political force because of that. Kennedy is elected president. He appoints Newton C. Minow as the head of the Federal Communications Commission. He's still alive. He's about 95 in Milwaukee. And Minow says television and the public interest speech. Minow says commercial television landscape is a vast wasteland, and he advocates for public service television. And he gets CBS and NBC and ABC to expand their nightly news from 15 minutes to a half hour. He pushes for educational TV. That's how TV was watched back in the day, a vast wasteland. What he said, you will see a procession of game show hosts, formula comedies about totally unbelievable families, blood and thunder, mayhem, violence, sadism, murder, Western bad men, Western good men, private eyes, gangsters, more violence, and cartoons. Sounds like they could have been Hedley Lamar's army, and here's that guy again, Mel Brooks in Blazing Saddles. And endlessly commercials, many screaming, cajoling, and often offending. and most of all, boredom. Oh, true, you see a few things you will enjoy, but they will be very, very few. And if you think I exaggerate, I only ask you to try it. Oh, that's the minnow too. Minnow, the SS minnow, but it's spelled with two N's as opposed to minnow with one N. The Gilligan's Island TV boat was named after Newton Minnow because the Gilligan Island executive producer Sherwood Schwartz thought that minnow was going to ruin TV. And we leave the early days of TV where no man has ever gone before, Lucy. But it should say where no woman has ever gone before, because who was the first Trekkie? She was Lucille Ball. And by 1964, she breaks the glass ceiling. And she is the president and CEO of Desilu Productions. And she's making decisions, what show to take, what show to reject. Lucy has two proposals, one for Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek and the other for Mission Impossible. It was clear Mission Impossible was a go. Even though it was expensive, it was a go. Desilu at that point is only doing the Here's Lucy show, so they need shows. But Star Trek is going to cost a ton of money to produce for a pilot to show before a network. Lucy actually thought that the series was about traveling USO performers initially, and then was explained that it was about science fiction. And her board of directors said, I don't think we should do it. It's too expensive. It's silly. We're not going to do it. Lucy said, we're going to do it. I run the company. I believe in the show. We're going to do it. And they do. It was called The Cage. And NBC was not impressed with The Cage. However, NBC saw something in there and said, let's have a second pilot and do what you want. The second pilot's written up where no man has ever gone before. And the only one that's left is Mr. Spock, Lenny Nimoy's character. Leonard Nimoy. My friend, the late Shelley Saltman, grew up with Lenny Nimoy in Boston and got his hair cut by Lenny Nimoy's father, Max, who ran the local barbershop. So Lucille Ball says, okay, let's do it. And the board of directors saying, you can't do it. It's going to bankrupt us. It's going to kill us. If you do this, you can't do it. You can't do it. You can't do it. Lucy says, do it. And she does. And the rest is history. Lucy would sell her company, Desilu, which was debt-ridden, losing money when she took it over in 1962. She turned it around. It began to make money. She was the most powerful business woman in Hollywood. Of course, she was the only one. But for people who talk about the glass ceiling and women's liberation and all that other stuff, Lucy was quiet about it. She just went about her business. And she turned the studio around and sold it for an enormous profit. 17 million then, probably about 150 million now. But if she sold it now, it would be probably closer to a couple $1 billion. Anyway, thank you, Rochelle, for inviting me. And there I am on ABC News now on the Sam Donaldson Show back in 2005. Thank you. Any questions, any comments, any remembrances? I am all ears for you. I am tucked out, so go ahead. Anybody have any questions, comments? Feel free.
Oh, Nancy, I think you're muted.
Yeah. Hi, Nancy. How are you?
There you go.
She's still muted. You got to ask her to unmute herself.
Okay.
There you go, Nancy.
There you go.
This is Nancy, and this connects to the library. Exactly. I was here in Vermillion. I was alive when TV came and lived on Walker Street. We had a couple boys, and one of them was best friends with Ross Engelman. And you may recognize the name as one of your librarians.
Yeah.
And anyway, that's a cousin of his, growing up now and married. But anyway, my Jim was now 53, and Ross were best friends, and they used to tool around the neighborhood on their little bikes, scaring everybody. But what I remember was that Tom, the dad, walked to the university. He was an early worker at KUSD TV and radio, and he had a briefcase that said, "Bringing public television to South Dakota." And he walked by the house with that quite often. So that was a normal sight. Anyway, I thought I'd tell that story just because it connects with you.
Thank you.
I've been a client of public TV ever since. It's about all I watch and listen to.
Which started in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you for coming to Vermillion virtually.
Anybody else? Guess you got a quiet crowd who was either satisfied or disgusted.
Hopefully satisfied. Thank you very much, Evan, for that.
Thank you, Rochelle, for inviting me, and hopefully we can do this again in the future. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that. I got to do this talk in Boston in about a week, so all that stuff that's in for South Dakota gets unplugged, and all the Boston stuff gets plugged in. But the Lucy thing is rather interesting because Lucy, I had known the stories about Lucy. I didn't realize that, with women being empowered, she did everything. She did it really quietly, and she was the most powerful businesswoman. And she did her last big thing in investing was a Tom Cruise movie. I forgot what it was called, in the 1980s. And thank you, Stuart. I appreciate it. And she invested in this Tom Cruise movie, and he won Academy Awards for it and all that. So even in her 70s, she was still very active on the business end. And she was one hell of a businesswoman, except she got lucky. TV came along. Without TV coming along, she was a failure as an actress in movies. Without TV coming along, she may have just gone back to Jamestown, New York, and never heard of her.
Awesome.
Okay, well, I think that's it. I think I've been here an hour and a half, so
Yeah,
I hope it wasn't too long. I hope you found it interesting.
that's okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and hopefully we could do this again in the future when you go to your hybrid.
Yeah.
I only have 35 other topics, so.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan.
Thank you for inviting me. I want to thank everybody who was here today. We got Dan and Daniel and Linda and Nancy and Phil and Stuart. Thank you so much for spending a little time with me. Have a wonderful holiday weekend. Be careful out there. I got my shot, so I could be a little less careful, but I'm still very careful. And thank you, Rochelle. Have a great weekend. Everybody have a great weekend. Have a wonderful holiday weekend. And I'm off until Sunday, so I have a day off tomorrow. So anyway, thank you so much. And we'll see you somewhere somewhere in the future. Bye-bye, Rochelle. And bye-bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.